I don't know. You are. I can. يريد موعد من الشاحن.
شلون عودوها منها.
Mouth.
My tapping.
Oh my god.
Hi. How are you?
Hey, you're not anonymous anymore.
Look, sayang. Yeah, I know.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. You are. I can. يريد موعد من الشاحن.
شلون عودوها منها.
Mouth.
So hello there. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you to Adam and Stacey, who've given me the opportunity to talk about some of the work I've been exploring over the past few years. My name is Auger-Loizeau. I'm a lecturer at Goldsmiths, and I've been wandering around various forms of creative practice for longer than I really want to admit. The work that I'm going to talk about today is ongoing, and as an audience, you are a crucial part of what we have been doing. You're contributing by making it active. So you may or may not agree with me or the things that I present, but for this work to begin to do anything, we need you. So thank you for being the audience. The talk will split into three kind of main sections. I'll talk about my shift from a field of design that I landed in by accident and my practice crisis, which was in about 2012. I'll also read some diary entries from work I did in the Calais jungle about relationships and thoughts about navigating a form of practice that was new to me. I'll discuss the media and its role in making me ask some ugly questions about myself. I'm also going to show some short films that you will see throughout the presentation and talk about why they were made and how they were made. The short films made over the past few years try to address this through a negotiated and collaborative form of broadcast that presents a view of people who smile, swim, dance and laugh to create points of connection. But first, back to my crisis in 2012. Since 2000, James Auger and myself had worked producing work like the Afterlife Project, the Tooth Implant and the isophone. It had been an interesting time for us both, engaging in new kinds of experimental design practice and looking at how it could be activated and how it could begin to include new audiences and speak to people from outside of the discipline to discuss technology and its wider implications. At the time, we had both finished our MAs and the iPhone was still 7 years away. It was a good time to start thinking about how intimate we were about to become with technology. Some years later, whilst presenting a project called the Carnivorous Domestic Entertainment Robots at a conference in Amsterdam in 2012, I heard Cameron Sinclair talking about architecture for humanity and amazing work like Skatistan, founded by Oliver Percevich. It was real-world, relevant and powerful. The work James and I had been doing was increasingly shown in galleries, which was away from our initial idea of expanded audiences. Perhaps we had been ranting about technology for too long. I was about to go on stage and talk about a series of domestic robots that ate flies and told the time, and this is when my practice crisis hit. As I trudged on the stage, I thought, stupid fucking robots, and a shift in practice began from there. James and I carried on making work, but both of us were looking for new opportunities for design through new kinds of practice. From that moment on, I began to move away from the socio-technological concerns of the past 12 years and began looking for new things to think about. I found myself eventually in France on a series of trips volunteering in refugee camps in Calais. We were never intending to operate in this space as designers. In fact, the idea of looking for practice at that point seemed vulgar. When first asked to go to the refugee camp, I looked for reasons not to go. The idea of going into the environment that I'd seen so much of in the news made me feel really uneasy. The word jungle conjured all kinds of thoughts about lawless, wild places. Was this why I was unwilling to go? I asked myself, was this fear? Was it racism? Was it my racism? There's nothing good about using that word so close to yourself. I'd never considered myself to be one of them. I wondered where this apprehension, this fear, had come from. As I said, my only connection with that place at the time had been through what I'd seen in the papers and television. The media predominantly showed negative or tragic depictions of the refugee situation, to show the truth, perhaps to promote empathy. There was also the media who were feeding right-wing positions, describing people as swarms. Our Prime Minister at the time had used the word swarm. Both sides of the media had perhaps played a role in the othering of people, through the images we saw of squalor, violence, crowds locked behind barbed wire, death. Perhaps I wanted to remain detached from a situation that was too hard to see. Perhaps I was scared of the situation, of the people. I decided, perhaps conveniently, that the media was to blame for my fear. This fear of the other, or the media other, felt important to discuss, to admit.
Yes, attendez, je prolonge un peu. Ma petite fille, c'est plus petit que ça pour porter mon nom. Je suis noir. Noir comme l'ombre du solide. Tu es ce solide, tu es mon ombre. Tu as cette ombre comme moi. Je suis mal à l'aise. J'ai autant d'espoir que la pluie. J'ai envie de jouer avec moi-même et mon effigie. Je marche, je vais passer de ma solitude. Fleurs, parfum, mélodie, j'ai la vie. J'ai autant d'espoir que la pluie. Je suis devenu réfugié de la mer. Je suis une goutte. J'ai le pouvoir de la nuit. Mon asile n'est pas toi, cette terre. Oh la terre, non, ce n'est pas. J'ai mon ombre. Tu es solide. Tu es mon ombre. Tu as cette ombre comme moi.
The constant negative portrayal of entire populations had put something in my head, something negative, and I was certain I wasn't the only person that it had happened to. I ended up going to Calais with friends as a volunteer with a carload of tools. We took down shelters and relocated them. We repaired shelters. We built new shelters. The jungle was a world with no real support and no real infrastructure. You could say it was just short of chaos. I got to know some of the people I'd seen in the news, the swarm, close up, and despite the desperate situation, we laughed and my idea of the other evaporated pretty quickly. The idea of doing anything else other than what was asked of us as volunteers, of doing design stuff, felt uncomfortable. But ideas of doing things, of practice, of being a designer, slowly crept in. Initially, we began mapping the space as a future archive that could exist after it was demolished. The jungle, though horrible, was amazing. It was tragic and beautiful. It was full of those kinds of contradictions. The jungle, with its population of a small town, could not be obliterated from history by the French authorities. We carried on archiving the place, and this culminated with the fabrication of a tandem, a bike for two, which was intended to provide a system of mapping and archiving. The bike was built to create a record of the whole jungle site, but also intended to allow a kind of flexible interview system for those who wanted to tell their stories. The interviewer and the rider of the bike could switch positions and alter the dynamic and direction of the interview. At least that was the plan. We arrived with the bike on our third trip. The police were increasingly present and anxious. The bike had huge pink camera arms, which were intended to publicise our roles, our cameras and intentions in a way that was different to the journalists. These were spotted immediately by irritable law enforcers, and suddenly everything seemed quite ridiculous. All the intentions and plans that were thought about during the making of the bike fell apart. Eventually we did get in, but with the bike in a more stripped down version. People came to us, not because of our lofty ideas of alternative mapping and a different kind of journalism, but because the bike was fun. This is a diary entry from 2016. I turn up at Abdi's house with a map. Abdi agrees to let us record his voice and tell us about his journey from Oromia to Calais via Sudan, through the Sahara to Libya and then on to Italy. We smoke his shisha, which I really enjoy. Again, feeling really welcome and comfortable. The charcoal from the shisha drops onto his carpet. Abdi says he doesn't care, as his home will be gone tomorrow. We carry on smoking, and Khalid joins us. I've never interviewed people before, and it's awkward transitioning from conversation into recording. I clumsily set up the audio recorder and place it in the middle of the room. Abdi is preparing the pipe. Both of us are a little bit clumsy, and the pipe and audio recorder are precariously positioned on the carpet. Both of them fall. I move the recorder further away, suspecting that the settings will now be too low. The reality now is that smoking and relaxing with friends is the priority. Abdi's generosity extends everywhere, from hosting us to allowing us to ask him questions, sharing his pipe. No problem, he says. I bought the map so we can discuss our worlds. Shisha and map take centre stage. We take turns to smoke. Claire, our colleague, lets out a beautiful plume of smoke. I try to copy her and fail. I try again and fail again. Abdi is relaxing, making little flicks with the end of the pipe. I don't know why, but I try and do the same. I'm less than 100 miles from London, though I feel like I could be anywhere, Oromia even. I wonder if Abdi can escape the fact, just for a moment, that his shelter that we're smoking in right now will be gone tomorrow. We start to talk. I tell Abdi where I'm from, where my parents met in Ibiza in Spain. I tell him about a girlfriend I met in Paris when I was his age, and about my time living in Italy. I talk about family holidays. We've both spent time in Italy and France, though the circumstances couldn't be more different. The shisha has become wobbly. It tips over once and then twice, scattering charcoal on his carpet. I grab it, trying to stop the carpet burning, and hold it too long in my fingers, and they burn. Abdi tells me he doesn't care. It's all gone tomorrow, he says, gesturing around the shelter. It doesn't matter. It's devastating to hear, and I try to clean up. I feel like I've just nearly burnt his house down, early. The moment dissolves back into a more fragile reality. The pipe is stabilised, and we get back to the map. Abdi tells us of his original plans to get to the UK. He's now thinking that it's not possible because of Brexit. Now he has no plan, and this is painful to hear. We start to draw on the map. He shows his route through Ethiopia into Sudan. He tells us how traffickers would leave people when they ran out of money. It took 35 days to walk across the desert. People are dying of thirst. The journey goes through Sudan and across the Sahara. There are more dead, over 30. The lines drawn on the map are detailed with the dead. The lines move through Libya, going north to the coast. They arrive at the sea, making the crossing to Italy. The journey across Italy is far less hazardous. He travels by train and walks, and eventually arrives in the jungle. He tells me how one thing kept him going, how one thing kept him strong through all those months of walking and being at the mercy of traffickers, lack of water, and the sea. It was that he had a plan.
Shadow?
أنا من عفرين تركيا وجوزي بلاد.
The mistakes regarding some of the approaches that we made were only noticed in retrospect. Time plays its part in conversations with speculation, with design. I'm glad I went. Some of the early interventions were crude and formed on naive goodwill, but no one was hurt. We didn't annoy anybody apart from the police, and I'd do the same again. Some close friendships now exist, collaborations. We make short films, songs, poems, and try to think what these things might do. Another diary entry. Khalid and I are on the bike. We ride past some journalists from Belgium. They are on the road on the edge of the camp, looking across a field to the largest structure in the jungle, the Eritrean church. There are lots of reporters there. The final day of the jungle is newsworthy, and press are all over the camp. The spectacle of the destruction is a big draw. Despite our intentions, which are different from the journalists, I feel like we are part of that. There is guilt in recording people's situations. Khalid stops the bike and asks the journalists what they are doing, what they are filming. He asks them to stop, which they do. They ask Khalid if they can interview him. He says, "Everyone wants to interview me." Again, I feel part of this. We are not reporters as such, but we are outsiders with cameras. Sitting on the back of the bike, my situation, my placement on the bike, and my relationship is different to that of the journalists. There is no longer a situation where we need Khalid to do anything. We don't even ask if we can film anymore. He actually sets up the cameras with us. We're all being filmed. The Belgian journalists say they would not show his face in any film. We've said the same thing. Khalid asks for money, 20 euros. His house is going to be bulldozed the next day. Wherever he is going, he needs cash. Volunteers are handing out leaflets, telling people to have their belongings and documents packed in a bag and ready to leave. 20 euros seems a small amount to ask. The journalists talk about a professional code and refuse. I'm sure Khalid does not care about journalistic codes or indeed their money. What they want is access. They want his words, his stories, like everyone else. The atmosphere in the camp is tense, and people like us pointing cameras and recording is not what people want. Journalists initially may have been seen as a way to communicate the plight of these people to the world outside, but generally now they are seen as an intrusion. I'm annoyed by the journalist code. It's from a different world that right now seems wrong. The code comes from a world where you have a car, a hotel, an expenses budget. We're not in the world of fixers. There are no mediators dealing with dirty financial exchanges so that professional codes remain intact. During this conversation, I began to feel something that's hard to describe without sounding overly romantic. My connection with Khalid is warm. I understand, rightly or wrongly, that we were now friends. There's not a huge difference between what the journalists wanted and what we had been trying to do, but my friendship with the man sitting on the front of the bike is not the same as theirs. Khalid does not view us in the same way as he views the Belgian journalists, and I'm flattered. The talk with the journalists ends. Khalid does not give them an interview. Actually, he politely reprimands them for pointing their cameras at desperate people. Just before we ride off, he stops and tells them the areas of the camp where they would be safe. The media intrusions are not sensitive to the situation, and this insensitivity is causing tension. We continue on our ride. Khalid continued sending me updates and clips as the jungle was demolished. It was really sad to see the destruction, but I was happy to be receiving news from him. He sent us clips, attempts at being a reporter, which fade into teenagers singing a favourite song as a French bus takes them somewhere. This was the first time when the notion of a collaborative broadcast really happened. It showed the difficulty, but also showed them as boys who could have fun and could sing.
By underage, they'll finish for us the process over there. Yeah, they told you for us, they say. Okay.
This approach was something that continued in Greece, and a small network now exists sharing ideas and experiences to try and make small alternative broadcasts.
Στο πλοίο υπάρχουν 8 σταθμοί συγκέντρωσης. Σταθμός συγκέντρωσης A, κατάστρωμα 7, εξωτερικός αριστερός διάδρομος προς Φλόρα. Σταθμός συγκέντρωσης B, κατάστρωμα 7, εξωτερικός δεξιός διάδρομος προς Φλόρα. Σταθμός συγκέντρωσης C, κατάστρωμα 7, αεροπορικού τύπου καθίσματα στη μέση του σκάφους αριστερά. Σταθμός συγκέντρωσης D, κατάστρωμα 7, αεροπορικού τύπου καθίσματα στη μέση του σκάφους δεξιά. Σταθμός συγκέντρωσης E, κατάστρωμα 7, σαλόνι και αεροπορικού τύπου καθίσματα προς Βρύκα.
It's short, same as the life of the children who were struggling in it.
Σταθμός συγκέντρωσης H, κατάστρωμα 7,
It's like those short sentences to you altered by the human smugglers. Do you see those lights? The island is there. Voyage is too short. You will arrive quickly. What's the difference? What is it called? A slaughter between Turkey and Greece, which, because of the Almighty of Time, is in the path of the mouth of the God of the sea. Those who pass through the sea and see it, each have a unique relationship with the water, but undoubtedly all of them think about freedom. The meaningless freedom that may come up with a bit of a search, the minimum individual rights of a human will emerge. Safety and security they might never find. Many came to the sea because their lives were void. Yes, that void which they spent their last oxygen in their physical body mixed with the fear of dying. The void and the fear of dying, the only mental things they could understand in this amazing vacuum. All of them think about freedom.
So that's it. That's a few quite roughly made films or reports. It's obvious that in terms of filmmaking and reportage that neither Mary Colvin or Werner Herzog are part of the collaboration. But these little films, good or bad, need to be seen. So thanks for watching and thanks for being the audience. Cheers.